in the webinar series delivered to you by Sannam S4. We're delighted you could join us. I'm Brian Hyland, one of the Senior Business Development Managers based in the UK. Before we start, let me just give you a quick overview of Sannam S4. Sannam S4 are international market entry specialists, and we provide a range of international business development services, and coupled with that, we provide a wide range of in-country administrative and financial solutions. Today, we are talking about HR, and in particular, we are talking about managing HR governance and compliance in India, and we're going to cover off the top 3 challenges and offer some workable solutions. Sannam S4 supports a number of international organisations that are new in India already, and we support them on various HR requirements. The kind of topics we help them with include items such as talent acquisition, HR governance and compliance, managing recurring HR operations and tasks, managing and attracting talent, and of course building their HR infrastructure. We do all that. While delivering all these HR services, our advisors are always paying the utmost levels of attention on all matters pertaining to HR governance and compliance. HR governance impacts the way an organisation does business and how it makes business decisions at the highest level. It helps to align people management practices to the missions and the visions of the organisation. Subsequently, it leads to the following benefits: enhancing performance of the organisation's human capital, HR risk mitigation, and integration of HR and business decision making. Similarly, meeting HR compliance adequately mitigates regulatory risk of non-conformities and avoids reputational loss and promotes fair practices. So it's crucially important. With that context, I'm very pleased to be joined by our experts on today's topic from Sannam S4's HR advisory team, and they're going to share their update on effectively managing HR governance and compliance. Our specialists will also discuss some of the challenges related to this important topic and offer some practical, workable solutions. These are today's topics that we'll be talking through, and with that in mind, allow me to briefly introduce our speakers and the order in which they will speak. After me, Rohan Moktail, our Director of HR Advisory, will be joining and talking through the webinar, and then our Manager in HR Advisory, Shruti Gaur, will also be giving her guidance. Before we start, just a couple of protocols. You do have the ability to ask questions through the chat box in the window in front of you, and we would heartily encourage you to send through any question that you think of during this webinar. We will attempt to answer them during the webinar, or we will come back to you once the webinar is completed. And as you can tell, today's webinar is audio and slides only, no video. So, with that in mind, let me hand the floor across to my colleague, Rohan.
Thank you, Brian. Good evening to everyone who are listening me in India today, and good morning to all of those who are listening me today from the US, and also good afternoon to all who are able to hear me from the UK. Well, thank you for dialing in, and I'm very happy to be here today, and it'll be my pleasure to offer you insights about the topic, which is HR governance and compliance in India, and the top 3 challenges and the workable solutions to meet those challenges. So over the next few minutes, I'm going to talk to you about 3 things. One is, and the key here is the pillars of HR governance, that what is really HR governance based on, and what are the factors which are important to really build this HR governance model. Then the organization's life cycle, that how does HR governance and compliance play an important role across various phases of an organization's life cycle. And then we will subsequently talk about various perspectives of HR governance and the challenges and the workable solutions for those challenges. So if I look at HR governance from a holistic view, in my opinion, there could be 4 pillars to HR governance as follows. The first and foremost is HR strategy and planning, then talent management, leadership development, and organizational effectiveness. I repeat, the pillars are HR strategy and planning, talent management, leadership development, and organizational effectiveness. They are not in any particular order, but they're kind of intertwined, and if you look at them from a micro perspective, you may realize that they are interconnected, and at various stages in an organization, they really play a crucial role. So let me start with HR strategy and planning. Now, when an organization, especially that is new in a geography or setting up itself new in a particular country, strategy and planning matter the most. It includes strategy of scalability of manpower, including best practices, adapting itself to changing environment, and also meeting the new needs and the daily needs of an organization from a people's perspective. A recent study that was conducted by one of the most reputed research firms in HR, it showed that leadership, performance management, and engagement are seen as having the most impact on business success. However, unfortunately, the HR metrics actually end up capturing the employee turnover, engagement, and career and mobility. Unfortunately, leadership and performance really score low on such searches or such research programs. But the fact of the matter is that leadership, performance management, and engagement are still seen as the top 3 impactful parameters. With that in mind, if you look at long-term strategies, it's important to involve HR in all kind of corporate governance and decision making. When an organization is new in a particular market, then be it a short-term strategy or a long-term strategy, involvement of HR is crucial. The reason being, planning of manpower to ensuring that the organization structure is designed in a way that is complementing the business objectives. So if the business is planning to reach from point A to point B in a certain number of years, then making sure those objectives are met through headcount, through manpower, through strategic objectives, meaning progression of those employees, and making sure that those employees operate at optimum level of performance. Now, all of this put together makes it possible for the organization to meet its objectives. And this will be only possible if HR is involved in just not corporate governance, but also in decision making. For example, if certain policies are to be written and certain rules and regulations or standard operating procedures are to be implemented, having the HR's involvement in such a governance is important, because that team can very professionally and aptly set the rules, make sure that the SOPs are laid out well, and at the end of the day, the HR policies and strategies are aligned to those business objectives, which in common terms we call it as business partnering. So aligning business and HR is important, because an organization can only meet its objectives through its resources. These resources would play an important role in the growth of the company. So right from where the resources are coming from, where do the resources would be aptly available, what is the timeline to get these resources on ground, what about induction and getting them on board, making sure that they see the larger picture in the organization, then helping them to learn and develop in the organization, managing their day-to-day expectations, and measuring their performance on the day-to-day basis. It all sits with the HR team. So as a part of HR governance, making sure that involvement of HR in day-to-day activities which are to do with business, operations, performance management, and career progression of an employee is extremely important. I see that as an imperative, because if HR is well versed or gets the right amount of exposure to know about the progress of business and its objectives and the level or the status at which the business is operating, then I guess the strategies of HR can be devised accordingly, be it for the current year or for the next 24 months, or it could be even beyond that. The next pillar is talent management. I just spoke about hiring talent or acquiring talent and onboarding them. So when the talent is on board, developing retention strategies is equally important as managing the talent. An employee in his or her life cycle in an employer operates in various phases. At a particular time, the employee may have certain expectations, be it vertical growth or lateral growth. So ensuring that those needs are understood and met with to a good extent is a part of the retention strategy. So if an organization is growing at a particular pace, as much as it is important to hire new talent, it's equally important to retain the talent that is on board, because a significant amount of time and cost is involved in hiring people on board. At the same time, an organization invests a lot of time and money in managing, in providing or imparting learning and training opportunities to those employees. So to ensure that cost is justified, retention of talent is important. So if HR gets an opportunity to develop retention strategies, that will also contribute to the HR governance to a good extent. So this is from an employer's perspective. But from an employee's perspective, how the HR team acts as a catalyst in driving the employee's motivation, how the organization and the HR team together continue to inspire employees and help them achieve their short and long-term objectives is also crucial. So managing the talent and retaining that talent, most importantly, also would be an important pillar of HR governance. If an organization is developing or is actually moving ahead and growing at a very fast rate, and if the talent is not managed well and there is no retention strategy, then the organization cannot continue to succeed beyond a particular point. If you're looking at sustainable growth, then making sure that robust retention strategies exist and employee motivation is at its peak is always important. Next comes the leadership development. So as you continue to hire employees, some of them are organizations' future leaders. Some of them would take up more responsibilities in year 2, year 3, and they would also act as inspirational sources for new people coming on board. So ensuring that the people who are coming on board, who are hired in a particular function, they are motivated, and the leaders who are managing the staff, they are trained in a way that they are just not able to drive the business objectives but also pose themselves as inspirational leaders is extremely important. Leadership development in its own impacts the organization's growth to a good extent, because unfortunately in most of the surveys I spoke about some time back, leadership still is at the bottom of the scale, but the common characteristic of leading drivers is that you can actually measure that leadership. There are several tools that actually exist to gain insight in the way leadership is functioning, but not many organizations actively measure the way the leaders affect business results. So at the end of the day, if the leadership team is performing in a particular way, at the same time is able to inspire talent and is creating future leaders in the organization, that also would be an important part where HR can contribute and will be ultimately seen as a part of HR governance. Similarly, career progression of those leaders, and then making sure that they are replaced effectively by new professionals who are equally active and contribute equally well to the organization. I'm referring to succession planning. So if there's effective succession planning for the leaders who are moving up the ladder, and HR is able to actively support and participate in that process, then in the long run, the organization will only benefit. So if right from the time of hiring, if HR teams get an opportunity to work with the line managers about developing the career progression of the existing team members and then planning the successors, then ultimately the leadership development process would work in a very, very uniform manner, and that would act to HR governance to a good extent. And ultimately, organizational effectiveness. That we spoke about HR strategy and planning, talent management, retention, and leadership development. But to ensure that an organization is operating at its optimum level and is operating in a very effective manner, it's important that certain governance related to HR, be it compliance to policies and procedures, be it making sure that there is a good enough of knowledge imparted to people, building a learning culture where organizations invest continuously in learning and development opportunities of people. There's good opportunity for exchanging knowledge, and the culture is constantly based on learning and motivating factors. And then to ensure that the knowledge is also managed well. All of this would ultimately lead to organizational effectiveness. So just to repeat, we spoke about 4 pillars of HR governance primarily: HR strategy and planning, which involves HR team members in drawing, right in the corporate board or in the boardroom, the manpower strategies and planning it to a long term, then aligning the business and HR, then managing talent and then retaining talent through employee motivation, hiring and motivating and training leaders, planning their successors, and then staying compliant all the time with policies and procedures and applicable laws, and then building a culture that's constantly fostering learning and then managing that knowledge. I spoke about organization life cycle some time back. And this is primarily for those organizations who are relatively new in India, and some of who representatives are actually listening to me this evening or this morning, that a new organization goes through 3 different phases, or I would rather say that the organization can be divided into 3 phases. The first one being startup, the next one being the growth stage, and then the maturity stage. So at the time of inception, which is the startup phase, it's important to determine the strategy of HR. Determination of HR strategy also is important because that would ultimately lead to developing the business objectives and developing the long-term plan of an organization. The amount of people who are investing their energies and time in the business matters equally as much as the tools and the other avenues in the business matter. So designing an HR strategy would include having a headcount planning, having certain policies, certain cultural agreements, having a mission and vision for the organization, designing organization structures, and then making sure that at various phases certain best practices are adapted by the company so that you can not just attract talent but also retain talent. And then all the mandatory HR registrations as the company grows, because in India, and I've said this in my previous webinars, in India, the applicability of certain laws depends on the number of people who are on board. For example, when an organization crosses 20 as a headcount in the Provident Fund, which is equivalent to the Social Security in the US, that kicks in. When the headcount is 10 and above, then various laws like the Maternity Benefits Law, which is amended recently, the Sexual Harassment of Women at Workplace Act, the Payment of Gratuity Act, so on and so forth, they kick in. So while the strategies and the development policies are being designed, at the same time, the mandatory registrations have to also be considered. That's one of the important things an organization should consider at the startup phase. Similarly, not to forget about building certain operating principles for the company, be it standard operating procedures for various functions, be it recruitment, be it onboarding of people, be it management of benefits, or writing certain specific policies to ensure that there's no disturbance in the business and the change management is received very positively. So things like having a proper leave policy with a maternity benefit highlighted, a policy that covers travel and day-to-day expenses of employees, so on and so forth. Then the next stage is the growth stage, when the organization starts to witness growth. And in our experience, we have seen that typically between 18 to 24 months, this phase kicks in, where the organization has gone through a phase of determining their strategies, including the HR strategies, then designing their structures, planning the different roles, and making sure that the manpower is hired to perform those roles, and then the mandatory registrations, etc., is all done. Then when the growth phase is experienced, that's the time you experience, where you are required to hire more people. At the same time, you have the challenge of keeping the current people happy and motivated. So how can you do that? One way of doing it is to make sure that the best practices have adapted, and so you do either a bit of a benchmarking about what are the benefits offered to people in similar organizations in the same industry outside, or we can do benchmarking of salaries so that ensures that we are paying our people adequately and at par with the market. At the same time, in the growth phase, it's important that we are sensitive towards the changing dynamics of statutory compliances, especially in the new government being active in India in the last 3 years. Very regularly, changes are seen in the local labor laws and the national and state-run statutory compliances. So sensitivity towards those compliances makes sure that the organization stays compliant at all point in time. In the growth phase, the business may demand certain changes in the current policies or may require writing fresh policies. For example, if you have sales related staff, or you have people who are constantly doing client-facing roles, then having a code of conduct so that business is done in an ethical and in an integral manner, or having a policy pertaining to gifts and entertainment or hospitality, so on and so forth. At the same time, in the growth phase, you will require people to join you at a very frequent interval, and people who come on board, they should also see the organization's past and future success strategy so that they can align themselves and identify themselves in the growth phase. So making sure that the onboarding process and induction process is made more robust as against it was in the initial months. And then finally introducing performance management mechanisms or performance review mechanisms in a way that performance is measured, it is measured at the right time, and it's also measured in a most fair manner. And performance that is operating at higher standards is also rewarded. So then introducing certain reward practices also would be helpful. Next to the growth phase, typically it is seen that the maturity phase starts coming in, where the organization is performing at a very good level. Most of the objectives which were set in day one or in year one were achieved, and now the organization is aiming for the next level of growth. At that point in time, performance management again becomes a key thing. So if the performance management systems are more critical and if they are more robust, then ultimately that would help to measure as well as manage that level of performance. At the same time, there are certain risks which may exist in terms of compliance, in terms of meeting certain operational standards. Then how to really mitigating those risks would be important. So maybe doing an audit would be important. So if today any of the representatives of any of the organizations who are relatively new in India, let's say a few years, and are listening to us today, they can actually consider doing certain audits, which we call as HR and statutory audits, to ensure that they are just not operating at the highest level of compliance, but they are also making sure that the tools or the documents they use, they are also contemporary and they are aligned with the applicable laws. Then at this maturity stage, it's important that more and more employee benefits are introduced that really retains interest levels of people in the company, and then they move ahead, passing on those benefits to the employees who are hired in the subsequent phases. At the same time, you may have people working in different offices, different regions. So how do you ensure that there's a professional bond built between all employees? People know who they work with. There's a good amount of synergy between your people, and at the same time, they all are working towards one common goal. So running employment engagement activities. So employee engagement activities could be making certain efforts to bring them all together, or running certain activities which will ultimately help them align themselves to a common goal would be helpful. And at the time of maturity, if you're dealing with any tough employees, if there are any disciplinary issues, then how do you manage those disciplinary issues, or if there are exits, then how do you manage those difficult exits is also crucial. So these are the things which I wanted to actually explain, that how they really are seen as integral part of HR governance. With that, I would request my colleague Shruti, who's on the call on this webinar right now. She would talk about HR governance from a compliance perspective, and then I'll take over again on talking about the 3 challenges about which this topic is today. So over to you, Shruti.
Yeah, thanks, Rohan. So ladies and gentlemen, the next slide, which I will be covering, basically talks about how HR governance is important from compliance point of view, specifically in a country like India. Any organization that is established or is getting established in India should remember that below checkpoints are imperative in smooth functioning and success of a human resource system. So the organization should focus on developing policies and procedures which are in compliance to local laws. For example, registering for a provident fund is essential for any organization which is more than 20 employees, which my colleague Rohan has already covered. It is not only important to put these policies and procedures in place, but also to make sure that as an organization, these are implemented effectively across levels. The next important checkpoint that we'll be talking about is managing performance of the employees. This basically includes making sure that the key result areas are defined well in advance as soon as the employee joins in, and is reviewed periodically based on those key result areas. The performance management system is established, and the review meetings, which plays a very important role in the review mechanism, is documented well. The next point talks about handling disciplinary and termination with basically correct procedures. So making sure that the proper documentation is in place. For example, in case the disciplinary case is related to a performance, then making sure that the performance improvement plan, the documentation around it is in place and it is handled well. To make all this possible, it is very essential to have an HR professional who is competent enough and is knowledgeable about all the processes which has to be put in place. So from an organization point of view, it's not only important to look at the compliance and the labor laws perspective, but also the best practices which are existing in the industry. Some of the best practices could be introduced. For example, something like a paternity leave for male employees. This is one of the employee benefits, which is not mandatory as per any act in India, but is seen as a best practice. The next point is on benchmarking salaries and these benefits. So basically benchmarking these benefits across the industry helps us to attract and retain talent. The organization should also have a focus on rewarding the best performance to make sure that they stick in the organization. So coming to the next slide, we'll talk about various risks and the various ways to mitigate these risks from the organization point of view. So the first point here is to making sure the risk is mitigated at the recruitment level itself, which means that any employee which is hired in the organization is going through a background verification process by a professional background verification service provider. It not only helps the organization to save costs, but also a lot of time which goes into training of an employee is also saved. The next point focuses on conducting scheduled HR compliance audits, which means that the HR audits must be robust, it must be periodically done, and also to work on fulfilling the gaps which may be emerging from those audits. Creating an employee handbook and updating it based on any changes that comes in the statutory laws, or also as and when the organization needs it. So as the number of the organization grows, there are various laws that come into practice, and that should be updated in the employee handbook on a regular basis. The next point is crucial, which talks about transparent communication with the employee. So any update happening at the policy level or in the handbook or in terms of laws should be communicated to the employees as well as documented well. So coming to the potential risks that an organization should be wary of. The first is the non-compliance with local labor laws. Since the environment it's under scrutiny all the time, and there have been a lot of changes in the compliance labor laws perspective, it is extremely essential for an organization to keep themselves updated on the latest amendments. For example, the latest one has been related to the Maternity Benefit Amendment Act 2017, and it is extremely important also from the third point, which is on increased government scrutiny, increased government oversight. So not only from the government and organization point of view, but it is also important from the employee point of view, because certain benefits and certain laws directly impact the productivity of the employees. So it is important that the employees are provided with basic hygienic conditions as well as also with the best benefit to make them retain in the organization. This directly links to the next point, which is loss of credibility as a brand. If the HR function in the organization does not perform well, it fails to establish itself as a good brand to work with. And lastly is the inflated costs. So again, this is linked to retaining talent. The organization must offer best practices to its employees, as it's always expensive for an organization to lose a trained resource. And it is always important to retain the existing employees. So that's all from me. I would hand it over to Rohan now to take it forward.
Just before Rohan joins, this is Brian, just reminding our audience to do post your questions through the chat facility on the webinar. One question that's come through from one of our US callers is that they've asked what are the top priorities when it comes to HR governance and HR compliance when setting up a new operation in India, which is very timely because I believe that's what Rohan's going to cover next. So over to you, Rohan.
Thank you, Brian, and thanks for asking the question to this participant. Yes, so if you actually look at a particular strategy for a startup to scale, to achieve that growth or to scale up, then it may be the case that that particular strategy may not work, which means that you may have to have multiple strategies to ensure that growth is achieved. So, in my opinion, if an organization that is moving from the startup phase and now kind of scaling up, as I said in the initial discussions, that making sure that you have the right manpower planning is extremely crucial. If you are able to sit down with the business managers and plan for the next 24 to 36 months the amount of people you would be able to hire in certain departments, and because the business managers may have a certain strategy in terms to achieve the business objectives, and one of the things they would need to achieve those objectives is people, and people would make most part of their business. So if that equation is right in terms of hiring manpower to the level of extent the requirement is, would also be one of the strategies for HR to ensure that business feels the support from HR. Second, there could be two strategies. One could be a long-term strategy and one could be a short-term strategy. So let's say in the year 2 you are really scaling up and you have got some investment, or your business has been funded to grow and your targets are set maybe 200 times, which means that you may have to kind of open up in different geographies and so that you can reach out to more customers. So in that case, how do you really brand yourself as an employer is important. One of the things you can do that is actually create a brand within yourself, by advertising on different websites, and you end up hiring people through direct applications. The other way of branding could be that you are seen as one of the best practices employer, and that you can do in the first phase, where when you attract talent, you make sure that people are happy in the company and they themselves act as brand ambassadors, so that people who come through their references would also look forward to work with this organization. And in our experience, we have seen there's one organization based in Bangalore. It's a technology-based organization, wherein 65% of their staff has come through the references or through the word of mouth of the first batch they hired. So people themselves acted as brand ambassadors, and they made sure that they would invite people whom they know, for relevant fits, to come and join the organization. So that the branding part is number 2. Number 3 is technology. In the fast-changing world today, how do you use technology in the HR strategies that would complement the scaling up you're doing? For example, which means that if when you are, let's say, limited number of people, let's say 25 to 30, majority of the stuff you might do manually or using things like Excel sheets, like managing the data of employees or managing the mandatory leave, so on and so forth. But if you are using technology in an optimal fashion, then of course that will help you, which means you can consider using certain sophisticated tools to manage attendance and day-to-day functioning of people, managing timesheets, managing their paid time off, so on and so forth, would definitely help you in saving a lot of man hours, and the team can then focus on other core activities of the department. At the same time, technology also would help you reduce certain costs which you would otherwise be incurred in operational activities. So that's number 3. Number 4, what's the learning and development opportunities you are implementing within the company, which can ultimately be responsible for meeting up those objectives in the scale-up phase. So which means that, are you preparing your people? It's important that people should be ready to embrace the change and actually accept the new and hopefully and probably the phenomenal phase of growth when the organization is trying to scale up. So the learning and development initiatives would include some internal training, so making sure that certain areas of improvement which are identified during the performance review process are addressed through some internal coaching and some professional help. For example, if people need training and coaching on communication skills, client interaction, managing time, so on and so forth, or some people may need some technical help so that they can perform in a better fashion. So that investment would certainly help, because ultimately, if your people are empowered and if we are gearing them up and we are empowering them just not from knowledge perspective but also from a skills perspective, that would ultimately make them ready for the phase which is going to be the scaling up phase, which again links back to the HR process of performance management, that if in the first phase, if performance management is done in a very professional manner, meaning identifying underperformance at an earliest opportunity and addressing that, at the same time, performance that is operating at the highest level of standard, then rewarding that performance would ensure that certain areas of weakness or improvement are identified on time, and then one can work on those areas of improvement, so that with that coaching and support, employees are ready to face new challenges and accept new challenges. So in my opinion, just to sum up, manpower planning, making sure that you have the budgets and headcount projected, and that forecast is based on actual business requirements. Number two, branding, that how you really improve your branding as an employer. How do you attract new people? How do you have new employees coming and joining you? And how do you really create interest within the market about your brand? And at the same time, how do you retain your people? How do you act as an employer of choice? Number three is technology, that how do you leverage technology to build your processes, procedures, and how HR governance plays an important role, because right from hiring people to managing day-to-day activities to procedures to compliance, and even in large-scale forecast, everywhere HR governance plays an important role. So having a proper HR governance and sensitivity to compliance would definitely help a startup, to reach their objectives in the next phase, and ultimately that's how they will scale up and experience sustainable growth. Can we take the next question, please?
Please continue, Rohan.
Sure. So we've received another question which says, during the growth phase, there is a natural requirement of hiring more people. However, at times, the estimates are not as accurate as one would have wanted it to be. So how does one re-strategize the requirement, or just in time? So again, it's quite a valid question given the topic today. So yes, I mean, it happens that generally when an organization is scaling up and moving to the next phase of growth, there is a certain requirement of people to join, and then certain organizations actually go one level or two levels down and plan it in a way that the hiring is planned across weeks, across business quarters, or across the full year. But at times it happens that your projections or your estimates won't be as accurate as they would have expected to be. And this would largely be dependent on the business, because if at the time of planning that manpower or actually working on a budget forecast for people, if X number of people have been decided to hire in consultation with the line manager, or in other words, that let's say the business planning is made in a way that would demand, let's say, for example, 50 people in the next 1 year. But what it turns out to be that, there's more business, and, the demand and supply ratio is not met. There's an imbalance between that ratio, and then ultimately you end up, getting more customer inquiries, and that means you have to have more people on ground. So in that case, it may not be possible for the HR team to always meet those business pressures through adding more people. So in that case, there are a few things which successful organizations have tried, and we also recommend during our consultation work with our clients, that first is they can evaluate if, within the current staff, if some people can actually, what we call it as multitask, if some of them possess certain skills that can actually meet certain, those requirements, or if certain teams can actually take up or share the roles and responsibilities of other teams, provided they have those skills. So that's one thing which can be considered, and it is very common in growing organizations, especially who started at a low pace and then have grown up to have people multitasking. Though it's not a long run, a long-term recommended strategy, but for a short term for sure. Second thing could be considering, and this is provided if you don't have budgets to hire more people, but you still need manpower, then you can hire, or you can consider hiring temp staff, which means that you would only engage certain people for a certain season, provided that job needs only certain expertise and certain skills. So engaging temp staff for a period of 6 months to 1 year is quite common in the industry, and then in that way you can ensure that your current headcount is not really affected, and the people are doing their jobs, and the people whom you've brought in from a staff augmentation perspective are delivering for what they have been hired for. The third thing I would say here is if such a situation happens that the estimates are not accurate and you just have to re-strategize just in time, then at that point in time, what you again can be done is discussions can be conducted with the business managers, so people who are actually running the business, either operations head or people who are in client-facing roles, that where exactly manpower is needed. For example, a company having offices in different locations may need people, let's say up north in the first season, and then they may need people down south. So maybe you can slightly rework your equations on the forecast and see if you can push certain number of your hires of the next quarter to the quarter after that, or in other words, can you actually prepone some of your hiring which has been scheduled for the next quarter and do that in this week itself or in this month itself, so that the current business targets are met. Of course, this needs buy-in of certain stakeholders. The approval mechanisms have to be met with. But these are certain options one can consider if the need for re-strategizing comes in. For that, it's important that the company stays in touch with certain recruitment agencies or professional HR consultants. At the same time, certain contract staffing companies are helping, because at certain interval you may have the budget, but you may not have the bandwidth to source people yourselves. So using the recruitment consultants in an effective manner will also be helpful. So I think that is my response. We can now move to our next slide, which is the core topic of this discussion today, is the top 3 challenges for organizations from the perspective of HR governance. So typically in our experience, we've seen and companies who start up in India and then they move to scale up, is that maintaining robust standard operating procedures. Since the company is relatively new and small, many people are performing different roles, and there's always a trial and error method being implemented somewhere. As we spoke about re-strategizing, that's also required at times. So what happens as a side effect to that, maintaining the standard operating procedures, or the SOPs, what we call it, in a robust fashion is a challenge, because if the business objectives keep changing and the business manager or the functional managers keep kind of bending the rules based on the changing dynamics of business, then it's a big problem from a HR governance perspective to maintain any kind of uniformity or consistency in those standard operating procedures. Any organization, especially in a market like India, will succeed if HR governance is properly managed and it gets given its due importance, because it's good to do business and succeed in business, but at the same time it's important to do business in the right fashion with the right types of principles and maintaining certain procedures. So that is one of the things which organizations face, to have SOPs being adhered to or certain policies and procedures being followed with. The second is maintaining the statutory compliances. So as the organizations are growing and they are experiencing phenomenal growth at times, maintaining that level of compliance with the applicable statutes becomes a challenge. This could be simply because of lack of knowledge about applicability of those compliances, or inadequate or unskilled staff to manage those compliances within the company, or sometimes the industry itself belongs to a certain category where the applicable compliances are more and constantly changing. So that is a huge challenge which most of the organizations in the growth phase experience. And since the ultimate end is quite dangerous, because obviously non-compliance means loss of reputation, a penalty from the government, so on and so forth. This becomes and this continues to actually pose as a challenge for many companies. And then the third, in our opinion today, we feel that the leadership that does not lead by example is also a big challenge for an organization. So certain leaders come together, they put a business plan, and they actually make the others see that vision, or they share that vision with other people, or when they interview talent, they actually attract talent, and based on certain promises and commitments, and then they have certain nomenclature or certain policies which promote things like fairness, equality, maintaining robust SOPs, managing compliances, et cetera, et cetera. But what happens at times in the zest of earning new business and coping up with daily pressure and fast-changing business dynamics, the leaders sometimes do not really walk the talk, if I may use that expression, or they sometimes end up bending the rules, or they don't lead by example. So they expect certain things to be done by other people, but they don't themselves demonstrate those attributes or qualities or characteristics. And that is a big problem, because if the leadership itself is not taking that ownership and not leading by example in a startup or a relatively new company which is trying to achieve its next phase of growth, then it's very difficult to motivate the rest of the staff and make them continue to share the vision that has been set for everyone. So just to summarize, maintaining that robustness and uniformity in standard operating procedures or SOPs, showing sensitivity towards statutory compliances, applicable labor laws, and maintaining it, and making the leadership walk the talk or lead by example would be the top three challenges for organizations who are new in a market like India and who are kind of pegging themselves at a high rate of growth. So what are the solutions to these challenges? So we spoke about maintaining robustness in policies. So if the employees or the leaders or the operational heads or the functional heads are sensitized by HR team or the policymakers about the risks of not maintaining that robustness in SOPs or not adhering to the standard operating procedures or rules and regulations, then to a certain level awareness is created between people, and then that's when they start adhering to those SOPs and maintaining that uniformity. So we have listed some of the workable solutions to these challenges. So we'll start with the first is abiding to local law compliances. So adhering to the local law compliances is important, because then that will keep the business safe from any litigations, any government oversight, and ultimately no penalties received whatsoever. And then the brand is safeguarded. It's important for new organizations when they operate in a new market to maintain and safeguard their brand, because if they are able to create a brand which is popular, then that's the time they can actually attract and retain talent. Then making sure that the company promotes a safe and conducive work environment for employees through introducing acts like this newly implemented Sexual Harassment of Women at Workplace Act, so ensuring that safety and dignity at workplace is maintained. Some of the solutions to these challenges could be bringing in diversity by adhering to these laws. For example, there is a maternity benefit law which already exists, but how about considering bringing the Paternity Benefit Act? Now in India there is no law that mandates organizations to offer paternity benefit, but at the same time it may be seen as a best practice, and that diversity may really help. Or offering people leaves like compassionate leave, which doesn't have a statutory base, but again is seen as a best practice. We also think attracting, hiring, and retaining employees by providing best employee benefit plans would also be one of the ways that challenges of hiring people and maintaining their interest in the company can be met with. Now, these best practices could be through getting insurance schemes for employees, so employee and their families can be covered under insurance schemes. Adapting certain progressive HR policies. This could be things like flexible working, work from home, or certain CSR activities that may boost employees' morale by contributing to the society, or simply promoting a rewarding culture where people know that spending few years in the organization in a productive manner may guarantee certain reward. Then increase the workforce performance and productivity by designing and implementing effective performance management system. Here is where the leadership plays a crucial role, where we spoke about leading by example and walking the talk. So if performance and productivity is designed and it's implemented in a way that it is just not effective but also quite influential on the organization, where the impact of these performance management systems and productivity tools is seen, then we can actually get more out of the existing people, and that ultimately leads to the productivity of the employer or the company. So these are some of the challenges we identified, and then some of the solutions we thought we should share with you. Of course, there could be another solutions where you constantly innovate as an employer, where good amount of research goes, be it benchmarking, be it understanding what are the other players offering to their employees, and how do they really stay at the top of the notch, and what the organization is contributing to the society given the new CSR laws. So these are the things which can be considered as the organization grows. But one thing I would certainly like to say here, that it is totally dependent on how the leaders operate in the business, especially in a high growth organization that started pretty low, where how the leaders help the other people come along with them and share the same vision. How do these leaders create an atmosphere of inspiration where people want to work and contribute further to the company, and how does HR's governance and other principles and policies play a crucial role in making people meet those objectives, and ultimately, how a rewarding culture can be maintained. So that could be one of the things organizations can look at. So what we just generally do is, for organizations who are listening to us today, and we believe most of them would be either new to India or about to start in India. So there's a range check you can do, a quick check, like a checklist about what are the things you should consider while, you are operating in India, purely from a HR governance and compliance perspective. So first could be that seek professional HR support. There are certain things which you may not be aware as a new employer. Maybe some of the information which you receive from various sources may not be 100% authentic. You may take help of the web as well, but if you actually engage professional HR advisors, in the first 18 to 24 months, there's a lot you can gain from their expertise and knowledge. Because at that phase, initially, when you have, let's say, between 20 to 50 employees, you may not end up hiring your own HR staff. You may rather invest that energy and money in hiring people for sales or business. But at the same time, you may need HR support and certain expertise to do and perform day-to-day activities. So by hiring or engaging professional HR advisors, you get access to their expertise, their experience and talent pool. Then training on all compliance and other risk procedures. Again, here external HR service providers make a good deal about, highlighting what are the new changes, keeping you abreast on the changing compliance and procedures, and then providing that actual orientation. Providing learning and development opportunities to your people, foster an atmosphere which would actually promote L&D opportunities. People should feel that the organization is constantly offering them new learning and knowledge enhancement. Then appropriate mechanisms for performance management, so be it appraisal, be it pay hikes, be it review, so that performance that is operating at a higher standard is rewarded well. At the same time, underperformance is highlighted at the earliest opportunity and addressed well. And then consider certain best practices of HR, which can ultimately help you just not to devise a long-term strategy, but maintain high level of HR governance in a strong manner and maintaining a healthy compliance level as well. So that's it from me this morning for people in the Western world. I would again hand it over to Brian, my colleague, for the closure of the webinar. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening to us patiently, and we would be happy to respond to your questions later on as well. Over to you, Brian.
Thanks a million, Rohan, and thanks to Shruti. They say time flies when you're having fun, and our hour is indeed up. We do have questions to cover off, but we will go back to you individually with those questions, and please do continue to post your questions through the chat box and contact us directly as well. In summary, I think we've hopefully given you a good insight in keeping on the right side of HR governance and compliance in India. And here at Sannam S4, we're happy to help you with all your HR, governance and compliance requirements. We've helped literally scores of clients land softly in India, and we're ready to help new clients as well. It's important for us to stress that we, of course, will advise you, and then secondly, implement these solutions. So we really are a single doorway of solutions for your HR needs in India. With that, I'd like to thank our speakers once again. I'd like to thank all our attendees who have taken time out of their busy day to join us. Please do view our website for future webinars like these, and we look forward to supporting you in the future. Thank you very much, everybody, and have a good rest of your day. Bye-bye.